Coogs House. All right, the Houston Cougars are in the Big 12. Football season's around the corner, and the AP Top 25 just came out without us.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you are a U of H fan or just a hater who can't step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you get the latest of the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel. If that's where you are finding us, it's good to see you again. Remember, we're doing a YouTube subscriber count giveaway every 250 subscribers. So at 1,500, we're just over 400, giving away a hat like the one I've got on. Nice little Cougar paw on the front, locked on the side, Nike Dry Fit hat. And when we get to 2,000, we get to 2,000 before Big 12 season starts, before the TCU game, we're also going to give away a replica Houston Cougar football jersey with the Big 12 logo on it to get excited for Big 12 football around the corner. We are less than a month away from real games. I can safely say that we're going undefeated in the month of August, and I think that's really, really special as we look at the AP Top 25 today. So we're going to talk some about the AP Top 25 in the first segment. In the second segment, I want to talk about when the Houston Cougars could get into the AP Top 25 and break into that, because I think there's a chance they do. And for what it's worth, there are kind of like some key markers in the schedule where like that could be that kind of a win. So look at that as well. And then the third and final segment, we're going to break trend a little bit and go talk about Nwankwo and a list he made, which is just a fun conversation about Dot. I could talk about nose tackles and linemen a lot, but we're going to talk about Dot in the third segment. So let's jump on in and talk first things first about this AP poll. Now, the AP preseason poll comes out a couple weeks before the season starts every year. This year it came out on August 14th, earlier this week. And they list the top 25 teams based on a bunch of votes by a bunch of people in the Associated Press. And worth noting, Houston received no votes, right? Houston was not in the top 25, and they have like a list of schools and teams afterwards, and they say like receiving votes. Houston was also not in that. Now, admittedly, as we look at this, I think that I want to break down why that is first. I think the deal here really, and we've heard Houston people themselves talk about how many new faces there are on the Cougars. Truthfully, I don't know that many people fully have a grasp of what is happening in Houston, or really like who's on the roster. So if I look at like who's on the roster at quarterback and look at like Donovan Smith and Lucas Coley, I don't know if a national audience understands that like Donovan Smith has won important Big 12 games before, right? I don't think people look at the roster and understand like, oh, they're returning 5 offensive linemen, all of whom that have played 5 or in their 5th year or later of college football. I don't think they look at the roster and think about Matthew Golden and the record-breaking year he had last season. Michaela Harrison-Pilot being the big-time freshman signee they had, the fact that they have a talented receiver room already with Sam Brown and Manjack and those guys, and are bringing in the highest-ranked receiver class that the school has ever had. As great an offensive school as Houston has always been, this is the greatest freshman class of receivers they've ever had, right? Like, I don't think those things are understood necessarily. And I think that's interesting when you look at like past top 25 polls, because like a year ago, Texas Tech notably was gaining votes, and they didn't actually make it in the top 25. Houston did, though, right? When Houston was a much more known commodity. They had Clayton Tune, had Tank Dell. They knew the American Athletic, right? Texas Tech played their way into it with Donovan Smith on the roster. That same Donovan Smith is in Houston. You would think that we've seen that guy lead a team into the top 25 before. Why wouldn't he do it in Houston? Houston was a team that was in top 25 at the back portion of it. But admittedly, sometimes last year, what's the deal, right? I think it's just people don't know the names, especially when you look at like the defense. We haven't talked about the defensive depth chart quite the same way we have a couple of the offensive positions. We will hit all of them before the season starts. But in the back half of the defense, there are a bunch of new names, right? AJ Halsey, Isaiah Hamilton, Latrell Banks, like a whole bunch of guys that, and when we break them down, we'll talk about what they're good at, what they need to work on, what we need to see grow, and those kind of things. But a bunch of guys that don't necessarily get associated with Houston the same kind of way, right? And so just interesting to see how those kinds of things unfold. Now, I will say in looking at this, Houston has 3 opponents they will play this season currently in this: Texas, Kansas State, and TCU, and then potentially a 4th, I guess, if they were to get the Big 12 title game and meet Oklahoma. Oklahoma is in the top 25. I guess there's not a north-south division or anything, obviously, but like theoretically, Oklahoma, if they don't play Oklahoma until that game, and if they're both undefeated or something, that would be the game. Houston also plays 3 other teams that receive top 25 votes in Texas Tech, UTSA, and Baylor. Obviously, with UTSA being the first game, it's hard to imagine that they move into the top 25 between now and then. But theoretically, Texas Tech and Baylor could both be in the top 25 very, very easily by the time Houston plays them. So the schedule is tough as far as looking at the top 25. The SEC has 6 teams in it. The Big 10 has 5. Pac-12 has 5. The Big 12 has 4, and Houston plays 3 of them. For what it's worth, the American Athletic Conference has 1. ACC, I should say, has 3. The American Athletic Conference has 1. That's Tulane. And so it's interesting to see the way that this breaks down with, of the top third of the Big 12, Houston's going to end up playing most of them. I like the schedule Houston's got a lot for a lot of reasons, but the AP poll really points out how big a jump up this schedule is right there in the American Athletic Conference, Houston, that is. Maybe they make it because people look at their strength of schedule as a little bit differently. Maybe they see as a team that won more games, but they would only be playing one opponent in the top 25, regardless of where they put Houston, right? So that's kind of the step up in play you expect when you go to the Big 12. I think what's interesting, what I'm maintaining, and I think that it's interesting to see that the national audience has not picked up on this outside of you and I. Houston's got a Big 12 roster. Houston's got a roster with Big 12 guys. Tony Mathis came from West Virginia, right? These guys have been Power 5 football players across the board. Brandon Mack played at Ole Miss, right? Gwegbu played at Oklahoma. These guys come in, and there's no bump for Houston. And that's just an interesting thing to see in the AP Top 25 voting. Now, in the second segment, I want to talk some about how that could change and when that could change and what triggers could change that. But first, we got to talk about making a little bit bigger change. And that is if you were talking about needing to, maybe, and I know I wear a hat every day on this because the reflection from the light up above on the hairline would not be great, but we all go through this sometimes, right? And so with Nutrafol, you can fix those problems. Now, you don't have to choose between better hair growth and your health because Nutrafol provides a whole body health approach for men that promotes healthier hair. No drugs, no compromises, just better hair. And men think losing their hair is inevitable, but it's not. You can take control of your hair's future with Nutrafol's science-backed hair growth supplement for men. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth for visible thickness and visible scalp coverage. I've got my box right here, and you can't see it because of the green screen, right? I can't quite see it. Well, for the visual audience, that's not working so well, but I've got my box right here. Maybe I can pull up the thing inside. Anyway, you can go to Nutrafol.com/men to take their health wellness quiz. You can identify causes of your thinning hair. They'll give you a personalized plan for better hair growth, that the whole body and wellness. I got a buildup blocker here, and I got some different conditioner and stuff like that as well. All kinds of things to see what we can do with what's on top of my head and under this hat. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Find out why Over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men, and enter promo code Locked On College. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code Locked On College. All right, now the question about the top 25 is, when does Houston find ways to get in? Because the preseason top 25 would be nice. But let's be honest, Dana Holgorsen will tell you first, Pesman will tell you second, and everyone on the team will tell you as soon as you ask them, being on the preseason top 25 is not all that important. It's about being on it at the end. Where do you fall on the top 25? Where are you in the ranking of things when it's time to talk about bowl games, time to talk about college football playoffs, time to talk about winning the Big 12? Those kinds of moments are when it's way more important to get into and talk about where you are in the top 25. And Houston's got some spots on their schedule that do look like openings to enter the top 25. Admittedly, a lot of this hinges on you probably have to beat UTSA week 1 to have a shot and make the top 25. Now, I say that to say that I think with UTSA being a school that received votes in the top 25, there is an understanding of the kind of program that is nationally. I don't think it's the kind of thing that people look down on just because it's a group of 5 school. I have maintained that if Houston is going to move into the Power 5, they need to be able to beat these types of schools, right? I don't mean to diminish what they were, but they said the same thing about us, right? When other schools were Power 5s, and Houston was a group of 5 school, right? Power 5 schools need to be able to beat their group of 5 non-conference opponents. And for Houston, that means UTSA. The challenge is the UTSA is one of the better, if not best, group of 5 opponents in the country. Quite literally, the only team to get more top 25 votes than them is Tulane, who won the American Athletic Conference last year and beat USC in their bowl game, right? Now, we did take Tulane's run game coordinator and offensive line coach in Iman Yagavi. So we'll see how that works out for Houston and moving things in that direction. But UTSA is a tough way to open the gates, especially if you're looking at it's kind of a lose situation. If Houston beats UTSA, it'll be like, of course they do. They're the Power 5 school, blah, 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 right? That's, they're supposed to be a Big 12 school. They're supposed to do those kinds of things. That's what you'll see and hear from the naysayers, including perhaps my buddy Drake over Locked On Big 12. That's, I'm sure, what they will say. But if Houston were to drop that game, you're going to hear a lot of crap about it. Now, that doesn't mean UTSA is not good, and frankly, does not mean that the season is lost by any stretch. UTSA is going to win a lot of football games next year. But it does mean that the road to the top 25 in the first half of the season would be kind of lost. Now, if you beat UTSA, I think the quick entry into the top 25 is just a couple weeks later against TCU. Now, I know that people say, well, you just said UTSA is really good. Why can't you just beat them in the top 25? UTSA is not quite in there yet. They would probably put Houston into the deal where some schools are, some people are giving them votes and they're in that same group of schools at the end of the top 25. I don't think just beating UTSA gets them in, but beating TCU in week 3 will. If they are 3-0, Houston is a top 25 team, full stop. This schedule offers that, right? TCU will have already played Colorado, and I'd go to FanDuel and put something on them beating Colorado in week 1. TCU and Houston open up Big 12 play in week 3. It's a home game for Houston, a big, chaotic welcome to the Big 12, celebrate Houston type of weekend happening on campus. So I'm sure it's going to be rocking. But the opportunity for Dana Holgorsen and company is that if they win in that game, then they're not only 3-0, they're 3-0 against teams that are nationally respected, both UTSA and TCU being teams that are in the top 25 or receiving votes. And that's important as far as Houston getting in themselves. Now, TCU is another team that has a lot of new faces, much like Houston. We talked to Steven over the summer about previewing that one. I'm sure we'll talk to him more leading up to that game specifically, right? But in looking at TCU, there's kind of all over the map speculation as how they replace Duggan and what they do on offense and what the transfers do and what Sonny Dykes looks like in year 2. And, they won a bunch of one-score games last year. And what does that look like in year 2? We saw Houston win a bunch of one-score games in 2021 and lose a bunch of them in 2022, right? Sometimes you just lose that coin flip. And so if Houston were to, I think right now we can safely say, upset TCU and UTSA, at least say upset TCU in the first 3 weeks and be 3-0, they're in the top 25. If they beat UTSA but don't squeak out but are competitive with TCU, let's say it's a one-score game late in the fourth or something, right? Something close, something competitive that shows that Houston is competitive with the top 25 team. They might not make it in that week in the top 25, but just 2 weeks later they play in Lubbock. Now, in Lubbock is interesting because we saw how that game went to double overtime a year ago, and frankly, like Houston should have won that game a year ago. But that game in this year is going to have a lot on the line for Houston. It's an emotional game for the folks in Lubbock. They're doing a Ring of Honor celebration. They're inducting posthumously Mike Leach and obviously Cliff Kingsbury as well, who will be there in person. I imagine they're doing both of those in that week with Houston because of the connections to one Dana Holgorsen. So he may be involved in that peripherally, and I hope people understand the value and importance of that and don't take that the wrong way. Those guys and Dana were very close, and I'm sure that it's important to Dana to also honor his friend Mike Leach, friend and mentor Mike Leach in that way, right? But that's a night game. It's Lubbock. Let's be honest. All there's to do all day in Lubbock is get ready for a football game. And I have family in Lubbock. Lubbock's very nice. However, there's not a whole lot else to do besides get ready for that football game Saturday night. And that game is going to be intense. We saw a game we can go to double overtime last year. We also know that Donovan Smith, being the quarterback at Houston, at least splitting reps, if not on the field the whole time at that point, will likely be a lot. There'll be a lot of cheering his way, let's say, from the Texas Tech student section. That game's going to get rowdy. If Houston can win that one and they leave that one with a one loss to TCU or whatever, I think that is also a top 25 team. They beat two teams that in the preseason are receiving votes in UTSA and Texas Tech. They will, if they played competitively with TCU, obviously that's important. That's a chance for Houston to get into the top 25 conversation and elevate the program's visibility a little bit. Obviously, losing to Tech and TCU would kind of hurt. Getting in the top 25 would depend on like a lot of if that kind of stuff across the rest of the country. However, I want to look at obviously beating Texas. Texas is a preseason. People are picking them to win the conference. We've seen what Texas does with pressure. We'll get to preview that game as we get closer. But the SparkNotes version of my opinion on that game right here is that we've been told Texas is supposed to do XYZ for the last 15 years, and they haven't. So I don't know why I'm supposed to think that they will now. Frankly, it would be very Texas Longhorns to like beat Alabama and then drop a couple of Big 12 games, including Houston, right? I say all that to say that Texas is actually my example for what if Houston goes 8-4. They drop, say they drop Texas because I'm wrong. They drop TCU and they drop Kansas State because Kansas State's really good, folks. And one other dumb game somewhere, right? They go 8-4. Texas a year ago was 8-4 and had a close Alabama loss, an embarrassing Oklahoma State loss, and a competitive TCU loss. And they were the top 25 going into bowl season. They then lost in the Alamo Bowl against Washington, which is, the Alamo is notably closer to Austin than it is Washington, but they lost in the Alamo Bowl to Washington and still made it in the top 25 at season's end. I think it's totally reasonable to expect if Houston were 8-4 going into bowl season and then say they won their bowl game, whether it's the Alamo Bowl or what have you, to expect Houston finishes the season in the top 25. And again, I think that's what's more important for the growth and visibility of this program. I don't know that you can how to define a successful season at Houston this year. I don't think it's got to be national championship or bust at this moment for the program. I chuckle because I think that there are people that feel that way year in, year out. But I do think being competitive in the Big 12 is a big step up because, frankly, they were 8-5 a year ago, and if they were 8-4 this year in a better conference, that is the same record, I guess. Then see what happens in the bowl game. But the same amount of wins in a tougher conference is better. Full stop, right? Also worth pointing out that as we look at this team moving into the Big 12, if they were to go 7-5, then win a bowl game, or 8-4 and win a bowl game, or what have you, that solidifies like, oh, Houston was the right pick for this conference, because there will be a lot of teams in this conference that don't go 8-5 next year, or don't go 7-5 next year, or whatever, right? And for what it's worth, there are several of those schools that are trying to say that, oh, I can't believe we had these Group of 5 schools and blah, blah, blah. And you see them online or in tailgates or on calling into sports talk radio and all those different kinds of things, trying to act like they're not worried. But if Houston goes 7-5 or whatever, or 8-4 this season with the roster they currently have, get ready, folks, because it's only getting better and better. There's a bunch of stuff in the wings if they can show that they belong this year. And I think that matters. Being in the top 25 matters because of that. Being in the top 25 matters for the visibility of your program. And in moving forward, it's just another step in the right direction. It's not something TCU did in their first year in the Big 12, right? And so you look at those kinds of things. I think that that's an important marker, and frankly, a good aspirational goal to look to. Now, I said in the third segment, I want to talk some about Nwankwo getting recognized. Speaking of visibility of the program, because this was really, really cool. So let's just jump on in. Back up. Bruce Feldman, national college football writer, makes a list of college football freaks, or crazy athletes in college football, every single year. And in his list of 100 crazy freak athletes of college football every single year, you've got guys like the number one guy this year is a freshman wide receiver at South Carolina that is 6'5", 243 pounds, and last spring as a senior in high school went 10-2 on the 100-meter dash. I mean, just crazy bananas. 10-2 is insane, right? Truly nuts. They put Nwankwo, nose tackle if you're Houston Cougars, in their 100 this year because they had some statistics on his size and strength. They had Dot listed at 5'11", 295. I think that's a solid size for him. 345-pound power clean, 625-pound squat, 535-pound bench, and then the video they had of him accompanying it was dragging two different 400-plus pound chains as he was dragged across, in a power back squatty position across the athletic facility. For what it's worth, the way that he's described as an athlete is interesting to me because it reminds me of a man named Aaron Donald. Now, Aaron Donald, we should preface, is a NFL Hall of Famer, no questions. I mean, at this point in his career especially, no questions asked, right? Contemplated retirement a couple different times, but this guy, I mean, crazy high motor, perfect pass rush moves, incredible body lean and angle, great separation with his hand fighting. And if you're like a lineman guy and get nerdy with stuff, Aaron Donald's hip movement as he's flipping through things and getting away from double teams is truly incredible, right? Aaron Donald, for what it's worth, is on the same list many years ago and came in at 6 foot and 3/4 inches, so just a little over an inch taller than Dot, and 285, so not quite as heavy. And then they had stuff about his speed. He went 4.68 in the 40 and explosive, hit 35 pounds, 35 reps on the bench press, 225-pound test, right? I'm not saying Nwankwo has to be Aaron Donald to get an NFL shot. But if he can continue to drum up this comparison and remind people that guys about 6 feet tall, if they're really good, if they have a high motor, and if they get after it, have an NFL shot, he could really help himself out, right? Pitt just had another defensive lineman. Aaron Donald went to Pitt, right? Pitt just had another defensive lineman drafted in the same kind of size demographic last year, right? Nwankwo could be another one of these guys. We saw a trend in the 2008 to 2015 range where people weren't scared to draft 6'1" and under quarterbacks. Nwankwo can kind of help continue that trend with 3 techniques or interior defensive linemen that have high skill, high motor, high leverage, etc., and just aren't the 350-pound behemoth. Because frankly, for what it's worth, at 5'11", 350, Nwankwo would not be as effective. He wouldn't be going as, he wouldn't be moving forward the same kind of way. He wouldn't be moving through the same kinds of angles. He wouldn't be splitting guys the same kind of ways that he does at 290 or 295, right? Because frankly, that allows him to be both athletic and agile while being big, strong, 625-pound squat, etc., right? If you are a line junkie or have listened to me long enough to want to become one, watch the way Nwankwo breaks through the double teams. It's a ton of fun, worth going to paying attention to. It's not an easy job. They don't hand that job to just anybody, and he does it all game long. Excited to watch him do it this fall in the Big 12. And if you're excited to do it with me, you can follow me at Painsworth 512, PAINSWORTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all of your favorite social media handles. I'll be happy to talk all things Cougs, Rockets, Astros. Texans have an exciting season coming up with Tank Dell on the team too, so that's kind of double dipping. But all kinds of fun stuff going on with Houston sports. So make sure you follow me at all of your social media, the Twitters, Blue Skies, Threads, Post, Instagram, all the things. I'm at Painsworth 512. I'll be talking about this show as well. That's where I post all this kind of stuff. Thank you all so much for making the Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And as an everyday, remember, you can ask a question in the comments down below. We'll try to discreetly answer it throughout the episode in the next couple of episodes, right? If you just put hashtag everydayer in your question and become an everydayer, be sure to answer your questions the best we can discreetly. It's a little secret club for guys who make it to the end of the episode, for people, I should say, make it to the end of the episode. So make sure you hit hashtag everydayer and a question down below. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Cougs today and making Locked On Cougs your first listen. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs. Oh, yeah. I'm getting the hand signal better, I promise. It's getting over it. Just the green screen, the hand. Yeah, we got to work on that.